Have you ever found love not in words, but in the silence between two souls who had nothing, yet gave each other everything? What if the one who saved your life couldn't speak, because they had 4 legs and a broken past, just like yours? In this powerful story from Vale Marks, we bring you a moment born beneath a tattered raincoat, where a homeless boy and a forgotten dog met under a storm, and something extraordinary happened. This is not just a story. It's a life lesson, deeply human, quietly heroic. Watch until the very end, because the ending may just stay with you forever. The rain fell in sheets that afternoon, soaking the sidewalks and turning gutters into rushing streams. The sky hung low over the small town, smudged with gray and streaked with wind that whipped umbrellas inside out and chased pedestrians into storefronts for shelter. People bustled past one another, collars pulled high, heads ducked low, each person wrapped in their own little cocoon of urgency. No one stopped. No one looked up. It was just another miserable rainy day. But then, something. A moment. A flicker of stillness in the chaos. Mrs. Langley, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s, had been walking home with a paper bag full of groceries. Her knuckles ached from the cold, and the plastic handles cut into her fingers. She muttered about the weather, about her umbrella, about her bad knee. Just as she turned the corner near the old bakery, she saw it. Under the narrow awning of a boarded-up shop, a child, thin as a shadow, was crouched on the wet concrete. His hair clung to his forehead, soaked through. His raincoat, if it could still be called that, was torn and faded, barely hanging onto his bony frame. But what stopped Mrs. Langley in her tracks wasn't the boy's condition. It was what he was doing. In his arms, wrapped carefully within the folds of that ragged raincoat, was a dog. A pitbull, trembling from head to tail, its ribs clearly visible through wet fur, its ears pinned back in fear or pain. Or maybe both. The boy didn't flinch as the wind howled down the alley. He didn't move to shield himself. He curled his body over the dog, shielding it from the rain, whispering words too soft to hear. One hand stroked the dog's back in slow, steady motions. His lips were pressed tightly together. No tears, no cries. Just silent, stubborn devotion. People passed them by. A few slowed for a second, but then kept moving. A businessman shook his head. A young woman bit her lip and kept walking. But Mrs. Langley stood still. There was something in the boy's stillness that rooted her to the sidewalk, something so quietly desperate, it squeezed her chest in a way she hadn't felt in years. She took a step forward, then another. The boy didn't look up. She could see now that the dog was shivering violently, its eyes half closed. The boy pulled the coat tighter. He had nothing else to give. Mrs. Langley's fingers trembled as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. It took her 3 tries to dial the number for the local animal shelter, her breath hitching in her throat. When the call connected, her voice cracked. "There's a boy," she said, barely above a whisper, "and a dog. I think they need help." The woman on the other end responded calmly, asking for the location. Mrs. Langley gave the address and remained standing near the awning, watching over the small figures huddled together. She didn't speak to the boy. Somehow she sensed he wouldn't respond. Or perhaps that words would just get in the way. Minutes passed. The rain never let up. Water pooled at her feet. The grocery bag grew heavy, but she couldn't leave. Not yet. The van from the shelter arrived quietly. A man and a woman stepped out, holding blankets and moving with practiced gentleness. When they approached, the boy finally looked up. His eyes, wide, dark, guarded, met Mrs. Langley's for a moment. Then he returned his gaze to the dog. "He's cold," the boy said, voice raspy, barely audible. "Please help him first." The woman knelt down beside the dog and placed a warm, dry blanket over its back. The man offered another to the boy, but he shook his head. "I'm fine," he said. "Just take care of him." They didn't ask questions, not yet. They understood the delicate balance in situations like these. Sometimes the story had to unfold slowly. Sometimes it began with trust built over time. They gently lifted the dog, careful not to cause it pain, and ushered the boy into the van after them. The woman placed a second blanket around his shoulders anyway. He didn't resist this time. He simply sat there, dripping wet, silent. Mrs. Langley watched them drive away, the red taillights blinking through the rain. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart beating faster than it had in a long while. She didn't know that boy. She would never know his full story. But she would never forget the way he held that dog, as if protecting it was the most important thing in the world. What she didn't know, and what the shelter workers would only come to realize much later, was that this wasn't just a story of a boy rescuing a dog. It was a story of two forgotten souls who found each other beneath the weight of the rain. A boy who had never been given much in life, choosing to give everything he had to a creature more broken than himself. And in doing so, perhaps, he saved himself too. They would give him a name. They would try to understand his silence, his stillness. But long before the forms were filled or the files created, this story had already begun, with a tattered raincoat, a storm, and a choice that changed everything. The shelter was a modest place, tucked at the edge of town between a grove of maples and a quiet road that few people used unless they were lost or looking for it on purpose. It wasn't fancy. Paint chipped on the windowsills, the linoleum floors had seen better days. But it was warm, and it was safe. For many animals, it was the first safe place they had ever known, and on that gray, rain-soaked afternoon, it became a sanctuary for two more. The boy didn't offer a name when he stepped out of the van, soaked and silent. His clothes clung to him and his shoes squished with every step. The pitbull in his arms, though clearly weak, kept lifting his head just enough to nudge the boy's chin, as if checking to make sure he was still there. The shelter staff didn't press the boy with questions. Not yet. They knew enough to recognize when someone was holding on by a thread. They set the pair up in a quiet room in the back, used mostly for new arrivals or especially nervous animals. It had a soft mat, a thick blanket, a heat lamp, and most importantly, it was away from the barking and noise. The dog, once dried and gently examined, was found to be malnourished, with a few healing scars. No microchip, no collar, no sign he had ever belonged to anyone. Still, his eyes followed the boy constantly, and when they tried to move him to a separate space, he whined and tried to stand despite his limp. So they left them together. The staff gave the boy fresh clothes, a sandwich, a cup of warm broth. He nodded but said nothing. When asked his name, he simply looked down. One of the volunteers, a kind, middle-aged woman named Martha, gently said, "Well, until you're ready to tell us, we'll just call you Eli. How's that sound?" He gave no answer, but later when she called him Eli again, he didn't flinch, so the name stayed. The dog was given a name, too, Max, strong, simple, solid. It seemed to fit the way he curled up around Eli at night, placing his chin across the boy's knee like a silent guard. Max didn't bark. He didn't growl. He barely made a sound at all. But he never left Eli's side. Not when the staff came in to clean. Not when someone brought in food. Not even when the thunder outside rolled through the hills like a freight train. The two of them, Eli and Max, were like puzzle pieces that had found each other in a world that often loses things more than it finds them. One of the longtime caregivers at the shelter, Helen, noticed right away. She was in her early 60s, quiet but perceptive. 5 years earlier, she had lost both her only son and his loyal canine dog, Rex, in a tragic accident. Since then, she'd found solace working at the shelter, caring for animals no one else wanted. She wasn't one to interfere, but from the moment Eli arrived, something pulled at her. A sense of déjà vu, perhaps. The way he sat cross-legged on the floor, not playing, not speaking, just existing in silence beside the dog who, like him, bore the weight of something unspoken. She started bringing them small things, warm towels from the dryer, coloring pencils and paper, a soft radio playing old jazz in the hallway. Eli didn't speak, but once she caught him humming along to the saxophone, eyes half closed, fingers resting in Max's fur. It was the kind of detail only someone like Helen would notice. A flicker of life, a heartbeat under the silence. At night, staff would peek into the room to check on them. Eli never used the cot. He slept on the floor beside Max, one hand always touching the dog's side. If Max stirred or whimpered in his sleep, Eli would instinctively reach over, resting a palm on the dog's ribs until the trembling stopped. They didn't speak a common language, but their communication was clear. Max was Eli's anchor, and perhaps Eli was Max's. One rainy morning, while wiping down the front windows, Helen watched them from a distance. Eli was feeding Max small pieces of boiled chicken, placing each bite in the dog's mouth with quiet precision. Max licked his fingers afterward, and for the first time, Helen saw Eli smile, just a faint lift of the corners of his lips. But it was there. That single, fleeting moment confirmed something she'd suspected all along. Later that day, she sat with Martha in the break room and said softly, "Everyone keeps saying he saved that dog, but I think it's the other way around." "Max saved him?" Martha asked gently. Helen nodded, eyes misty. "Sometimes all it takes is one soul recognizing another. Doesn't matter if they speak, doesn't matter where they came from. That dog gave him something to hold on to, something to believe in." And she was right. What Eli lacked in words, he expressed through care. He brushed Max's coat with a toothbrush someone had donated. He folded the blanket just so every evening, tucking it around Max's paws. And Max, once frightened, shut down, flinching at sudden movements, began to relax. He'd nudge open the door with his nose when someone knocked. He started wagging his tail, a little, slowly. But it was enough to notice. The other staff began to comment on it, too. They'd whisper things like, "That boy, he's good for that dog." And eventually, "That dog, he's healing that boy." Days passed, then a week, then two, and still, they remained inseparable. Two quiet beings in a world that had often overlooked them, now wrapped in each other's presence like a blanket against the cold. There was no need for speeches, for long explanations. Their love was quiet, steady, and seen in gestures. A hand on fur, a sigh of comfort, a shared piece of bread. Because sometimes, the loudest kind of love is the one that doesn't need to speak at all. Before the shelter, before the rain, before the name Eli was ever spoken aloud, there was only survival. He wandered through back alleys and broken streets, unseen by most and ignored by the rest. The boy had no coat, no name anyone remembered, and no one waiting for him anywhere. He slept behind dumpsters, beneath stairwells, on the cold cement of loading docks where the rain couldn't quite reach, but the wind always found him. Nights were long. Some stretched so far that time didn't seem to move at all. In the city's forgotten corners, he became part of the background, just another kid without a home. Another small, silent figure drifting through places people turned their eyes away from. He learned early how to be invisible, not because he wanted to disappear, but because being seen often meant being told to leave. He'd hide behind dumpsters when people came too close, slipping between shadows like smoke. He never asked for help. Not once. Even when his stomach twisted with hunger, even when his feet throbbed from days without rest, even when the ache in his chest felt unbearable. Instead, he watched. He watched families laugh on park benches. He watched parents fuss over their children's jackets and lunches. He watched as other kids were pulled into warm cars, as lights flickered on behind windows he'd never enter. He saw what he didn't have, not with envy, not even with longing. Just a quiet sort of acceptance, like someone who had grown used to being forgotten. Occasionally, a stranger would offer a sandwich, or a shop owner would let him sit in the back alley with a warm cup of tea until closing. But those moments were rare and never repeated. People had their own lives, their own problems. A quiet boy in dirty clothes didn't fit into that rhythm. Still, there was a part of him, small, flickering, that held on. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was the memory of something from long ago, too faint to name. He wasn't sure. And then came the rain. It had been cold all morning, and by the afternoon the skies gave way to a relentless downpour. Eli, though no one knew that was his name yet, was shivering beneath an overhang, curled up in a ball, his coat doing little to shield him from the wet. His fingers were numb. His breath came in short bursts, the kind that hurt your lungs. That's when he saw the dog. It was limping down the street, soaked through, no collar, no leash, just skin, bone, and fear wrapped in wet fur. People moved out of its way, barely glancing at it as it passed. But the boy didn't look away. Their eyes met, just for a second. And in that second something shifted. The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch. It stopped under a metal awning across from the boy and laid down slowly, as if surrendering to the storm. Its body trembled. Its eyes, dull with exhaustion, blinked slowly. There was no expectation in its gaze, no fear, just loneliness. Eli hesitated. His legs were stiff, his stomach was empty. But still, he stood. He walked through the rain, crossed the street, and sat down beside the dog. At first, neither of them moved. The rain hammered the sidewalk, bounced off roofs, and ran in rivers along the curbs. But beneath that broken awning, the world grew quiet. Gently, the boy peeled off his coat, wet and tattered as it was, and wrapped it around the dog. He used his own body to shield it from the wind. The dog shifted slightly, nudging closer. It let out a low sigh and rested its head on the boy's knee. It wasn't a rescue, not really. It was recognition. The boy saw himself in that animal, abandoned, weather-worn, tired of running. And maybe, in some strange way, the dog saw the same in him. In that moment, something remarkable happened. For the first time in what felt like forever, the boy didn't feel invisible. Because even though the world still rushed by, even though the cold still bit at his skin and the rain still poured down, there was another heartbeat beside his, another breathing soul that had chosen to stay. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know that someone would call for help, that they'd be taken to a shelter, given names, given care. All he knew, right then, right there, was that he wasn't alone. And for a child who had slept in mud, in shadows, in silence, that meant everything. Max couldn't speak. He didn't know the weight of words or the meaning of promises. He didn't offer comfort in the way people were taught to, with reassurances, with pats on the back, with practiced phrases like, "You're going to be okay." But he had something else, something more rare and honest. He had presence. Quiet, unwavering presence. In a world where most people passed Eli by without a second glance, Max stayed. From the first night they shared a blanket at the shelter, Max never left Eli's side. He lay beside him, not out of command or training, but out of choice. When Eli shifted in his sleep, Max adjusted, his body curving just enough to match the boy's. When the nightmares came, as they often did, filled with cold alleys and running footsteps, Max would lift his head and gently nudge Eli's hand until the boy settled again. Max listened. He listened to the silence between Eli's words, to the deep, tired sighs the boy let out when he thought no one was around. He listened with his eyes, with the tilt of his ears, with the slow, steady beat of his tail against the floor. He listened in a way no one ever had, not to fix, not to question, just to be there. For Eli, that was enough. At first, the boy said little. He ate quietly, slept when he could, and stayed close to Max like a shadow. But over time, something inside him began to shift. It started with a pencil stub, one he found tucked inside a forgotten drawer in the shelter's back room. With it, Eli began to draw. Not on paper, not at first. Paper felt too precious, too official. Instead, he used the backs of discarded flyers, the insides of cereal boxes, scraps of cardboard he pulled from the recycling bin. He drew clumsily, awkward lines forming simple shapes, a tail, 2 ears, a boy sitting cross-legged in the rain, a dog curled in his lap. Maximum. Always Max. He drew Max sleeping beneath a tattered coat, Max looking up with those soft, tired eyes, Max licking a tear from the face of a boy who looked an awful lot like himself. Each sketch was raw, unpolished, but in every jagged pencil line, there was truth, there was feeling, there was love. Helen noticed the drawings before she knew where they were coming from. She found them one morning stacked neatly in a quiet corner of the room, 8 or 9 in total, each one drawn on salvaged scraps and lined up like they were telling a silent story. When she realized they were Eli's, her heart caught in her throat. One picture in particular made her pause. It showed the boy sitting cross-legged, shoulders slumped forward, a storm raging behind him. Max was in front of him, tongue out, gently licking a tear from the boy's cheek. The expression on the dog's face was simple, but full of something deeper, understanding, loyalty, love. Helen sat with that image in her lap for a long time. She had always believed animals knew more than we gave them credit for. She'd seen scared dogs open up around children. She'd seen old cats curl beside grieving seniors in nursing homes. But there was something about this boy and this dog that felt different, as if they had found each other in a way no one else could. Max wasn't just a dog to Eli. He was a mirror, a reminder that even the forgotten could still be seen. Even the broken could still be held. And maybe Eli wasn't much different to Max. Maybe to Max the boy wasn't just a companion. He was a tether, a reason to hope again, to trust. They existed in a quiet rhythm now. Max would stretch beside Eli during the day as the boy drew. If the boy shifted, Max followed. When someone entered the room, Max would raise his head protectively, not aggressive, just alert. His loyalty was unshakable, his bond unbreakable. One afternoon, as Helen quietly dropped off clean bedding, she found Eli crouched near the window, sketching. He didn't look up, but Max did, his tail thumping softly on the ground. Helen whispered, "That one looks like a good story." Eli paused. Then, for the first time in days, he spoke. His voice was quiet, a little rough. "He stays with me," he said. Helen nodded. "He always will." They didn't need to say more. The words weren't the important part. The important part was this. Max had become Eli's safe place, his listener, his steady heart in a world that had too often shaken him loose. And Eli? He had become Max's home. It had been nearly 4 weeks since Eli and Max had arrived at the shelter. In that time, Eli had become a quiet fixture in the building, moving through the hallways like a ghost, always with Max at his heels. He never caused trouble, never raised his voice. Most of the staff barely heard a word from him, except for the occasional whispered "thank you" when someone left a plate of food or a clean blanket at his door. Max, for his part, was healing too. He'd put on a little weight. The limp in his leg had improved. His eyes, once dull and guarded, now followed Eli with quiet alertness. And when they slept, it was always the same. Max curled tightly against Eli's chest, Eli's fingers buried in his fur. The two had become inseparable, more like 2 halves of the same soul than a boy and his dog. Then came the family. They arrived on a sunny Saturday morning, a couple in their early 40s, well-dressed, polite, carrying the gentle optimism of people who believed in second chances. They were regular donors to the shelter, known for their generosity and kindness. But more importantly, they were ready to open their home to a child. The shelter had been trying quietly, delicately, to find the right situation for Eli. He had no paperwork, no known relatives, and no history anyone could trace. But the system had its ways of moving forward, and this family, kind, patient, willing to foster, seemed like the best chance for Eli to begin again. Helen sat down with the couple in the small meeting room while Eli remained in his usual corner with Max, sketching on the back of an old cereal box. They discussed everything: the spacious house with a garden, the school nearby with support programs, the room already painted soft blue, waiting for a child to call it home. They even had a golden retriever named Sam, gentle and easygoing, who loved kids. "They don't allow 2 dogs per foster policy," the shelter coordinator added carefully. "So, Max, well, he'd have to stay behind." Helen's heart sank. She looked through the glass window toward the room where Eli and Max sat side by side. Something in her chest tightened. Later that afternoon, they brought the family to meet Eli. The couple knelt down, introduced themselves, offered warm smiles and soft voices. They spoke of books and toys, of pancakes on Sundays and movie nights in the living room. The woman reached out and gently touched Eli's shoulder. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. Max pressed closer to the boy's side. Then came the question, the moment. "Would you like to come live with us, Eli?" Silence. Eli looked up, really looked up, for the first time in a long time. His eyes scanned the couple's faces. Kindness was there, yes. A promise of something stable, perhaps. He looked at the woman's gentle smile, the man's outstretched hand. Then he looked at Max. The pit bull sat patiently, watching Eli, his head slightly tilted, ears perked. There was no pleading in his expression, no fear, just trust. And that's when Eli spoke. "I'm not going," he said quietly. Everyone froze. It was the first time they'd heard his voice in weeks. Helen turned from the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. The woman leaned forward kindly. "Sweetheart, it's okay to be nervous. We'd really like to—" "I'm not going," Eli repeated, louder this time. His hands gripped the sides of his drawing. "Max is my home now." There was a pause, long, heavy, heartbreaking. The couple exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. Helen stepped forward slowly, her voice soft but steady. "Why, Eli?" she asked gently, crouching beside him. The boy looked down at Max. "He didn't leave me," he said. "Not in the rain, not at night. He never left." He blinked, then added, "If I go without him, it's like I'm leaving me behind." The words weren't poetic, they weren't dramatic, but they were devastating in their honesty. Tears welled in Helen's eyes. She pressed a hand to her chest and turned slightly away. The coordinator sniffed and looked down, pretending to adjust some papers. Even the couple, so warm, so well-meaning, found themselves blinking back tears. They understood. This wasn't about a house or school or toys. This wasn't about structure or safety. This was about love, the kind of love that doesn't come easy, the kind you find once, maybe twice, if you're lucky, the kind that saves you quietly in the middle of a storm. They thanked Eli for his time, gave Max a pat on the head, and left without pushing further. Later that evening, Helen brought Eli a grilled cheese sandwich and sat beside him in silence. Max rested between them, snoring softly. "You know," she whispered, "some people go their whole lives without finding what you and Max have." Eli didn't answer, but he reached for her hand and held it, for just a moment. That was enough. Word traveled fast through the shelter after Eli's quiet declaration. "I'm not going. Max is my home now." Everyone who'd been in that room, Helen, the adoption coordinator, even the well-meaning couple, left with damp eyes and heavy hearts. But what lingered most wasn't sadness. it was awe. That a child who had come in with no words, no background, and no family could speak such a powerful truth with just a single sentence. The staff didn't speak of it out loud at first. They just moved more gently around Eli and Max. Meals were brought with extra care. Clean sheets were folded with a kind of reverence. Max was given a new collar, simple brown leather with his name stamped in silver, and Eli was given a notebook with blank pages and a real pencil, no longer just scraps and broken crayons. But he still returned to cardboard now and then, saying nothing, just drawing. The shelter director made a quiet decision. No one else would be brought in to adopt Eli unless Max could come too. They didn't need another scene like that. Eli had made his choice. He had drawn his line in the sand, and it was shaped like a dog's paw print. And then, a few days later, something unexpected happened. Helen, as she often did, posted a photo online, a gentle snapshot of Eli curled up with Max on a beanbag near the heater, both fast asleep, tangled together like two vines that had grown around each other. She didn't say much in the caption, just, "Sometimes, the ones who need love the most come with the quietest voices." The photo was shared by a few friends. Then those friends shared it again. A teacher from out of town reposted it. Then a local news station picked it up, and before Helen had time to realize what was happening, the story had gone viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. "My heart is breaking and healing at the same time. I'd adopt them both in a heartbeat. That boy doesn't need a new home. He already has one, in Max." And then, among the noise, came a message. Short, simple, private. From a woman named Diane and her husband, Walter. They lived just 2 towns over, in a small farmhouse with a wraparound porch and acres of open field. No children at home. Their only son had passed away in a car accident nearly a decade before. Their dog, a retired search and rescue K9 named Scout, had died just last winter. They weren't looking to fill a hole, Diane wrote. But when I saw the picture of that boy and his dog, I felt something shift, not like replacing what we lost, more like honoring it. They didn't want to separate the two. In fact, they insisted that Eli and Max would come together, or not at all. "I don't want to adopt a child," Diane told Helen over the phone. "I want to share our home with someone who needs it. That's different." Helen was cautious. She'd seen interest come and go before. But Diane wasn't just kind. She was patient. She didn't ask for immediate answers. She asked what Eli liked to eat, what Max liked to do. She sent photos of their home, a sun-drenched living room, a big window seat covered in cushions, a fenced yard with soft green grass, and a doghouse that had been empty for too long. Helen sat with Eli that evening and showed him the pictures. Eli didn't say anything at first. He looked at the window seat, at the garden, at the photo of Walter holding a bowl of water for Scout, kneeling in the dirt like it was the most important job in the world. Then he looked at Max, and for the first time he asked a question. Would Max have his own spot by the fireplace? Helen smiled. Anywhere he wants. Eli turned back to his drawing. That night, instead of sketching Max in the rain, he drew him lying in the sun, paws stretched out, a bone nearby. In the corner of the page, he added a small figure of himself, on the floor beside Max, a hand resting lightly on his back. A few days later, Diane and Walter came to the shelter. They didn't bring gifts or promises. They brought themselves in old jeans and soft voices, smelling faintly of lavender and sawdust. They knelt on the floor without asking and let Max come to them. He approached slowly, cautiously. Then he pressed his nose into Diane's palm and exhaled. Eli watched carefully. He didn't run to them, but he didn't turn away either. He sat quietly, cross-legged, one hand on Max's collar. Walter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a tag. On one side, it read Max. On the other, it read, "If found, return me to Eli." They didn't cry, not then, but Helen did. And when they asked Eli gently, "Would you like to come see our home with Max?" He nodded. No words this time, just a nod. The transition didn't happen overnight. Paperwork had to be handled, calls made, questions answered. But the decision had been made. When the day came, Eli packed the few belongings he had into a small backpack. Max's collar was clipped gently around his neck. As they stood at the shelter door, Helen knelt beside them, her eyes misty. "You know," she whispered, "I think he really did rescue you, huh?" Eli looked up at her and said simply, "He found me." Then he leaned forward and hugged her, quick, tight, quiet. Helen didn't try to stop the tears this time. As the car drove away, heading toward a little farmhouse with a porch swing and an empty doghouse now waiting to be filled, Helen stood in the doorway of the shelter and watched them go, boy and dog side by side, two silhouettes against the rising sun. She knew the world hadn't changed overnight. There would still be sadness, still be loss, still be storms. But somewhere out there was a new beginning. And sometimes all it takes to spark a miracle is simply refusing to let go of the one thing that finally made you feel loved. Years had passed since the day Eli first wrapped his tattered raincoat around a shivering dog on a cold city sidewalk. Time had moved forward, quietly and gently, the way it often does after a storm has passed. But Eli never forgot. He carried those years with him, not as a weight, but as a map of where he had been. The cold nights, the silence, the ache of hunger, and the warmth of a dog's heartbeat pressed against his side. Every moment had shaped him into the man he had become. Now in his early 20s, Eli sat at a small wooden desk in a sunlit room, sketching in the same way he had as a child. The tools were better now, fine ink pens, soft-tipped markers, textured paper, but the feeling remained the same. That quiet focus, that sense of belonging, that knowing that some stories could only be told in pictures. Max, older now and with a silver muzzle, still lay at his feet. His movements were slower, his naps longer, but he remained as loyal as ever. He had followed Eli through every chapter of their shared life, through the early months of adjustment at Diane and Walter's home, through Eli's return to school, through the hours and hours spent drawing in silence, and through the slow, careful act of healing. The book had been years in the making. Eli didn't rush it. He let the story unfold the way it needed to, softly, honestly, like the rain that had brought them together in the first place. He called it Beneath the Raincoat. The cover was simple, a boy and a dog sitting close together beneath a large, tattered raincoat. Their backs faced the reader. Rain fell around them in soft strokes. But under the coat, they were dry, safe, together. It wasn't just a children's book. It was a love letter. To Max, to the shelter, to Helen, to the version of himself that once thought he'd never be seen, to anyone who had ever felt alone in a crowded world. The story inside followed a quiet boy who had no name, and a dog with no home. It told of rainy streets and silent nights, of a shared piece of bread, of two bodies huddled together for warmth. It showed how they were taken in, how they found safety, and how they gave each other something no one else could, belonging. There weren't many words in the book. Eli had chosen that intentionally. The images carried the weight. A drawing of the boy tucking the dog into a blanket, the boy refusing to leave when asked. A kind older woman placing her hand gently on the boy's shoulder. A field bathed in sunlight. A dog's tail wagging just slightly. The final page showed the boy, older now, standing at a library, reading the book to a group of children. Max sat beside him, still wrapped in the old raincoat, patched now, but lovingly so. The message was clear without saying much at all. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the quiet ones. The day the book launched, Eli didn't expect much. A few local stores had agreed to carry it. A nearby elementary school invited him for a reading. A library downtown planned a small event. But something unexpected happened, again. Word of the book spread. A librarian filmed Eli's first reading. His soft voice, his fingers gently tracing the pages, Max laying peacefully beside him, and shared it online. Within days, it was everywhere. People were touched by more than just the artwork. They were moved by the boy who had once lived in shadows and now stood in front of children, sharing hope. They saw the same thing Helen had seen years before, a quiet kind of courage, the kind that grows not from being rescued, but from learning how to love again. Requests poured in. Eli was invited to speak at schools, to visit children's hospitals, to read at retirement homes. And everywhere he went, he brought Max. He didn't speak much at those events. He didn't need to. He'd begin each session with a simple sentence. This is a story about rain, but it's really about love. Then he'd open the book, and the room would fall silent. At a cancer center, a young girl clutched her IV pole as she listened, tears sliding down her cheeks. At a senior home, a veteran with trembling hands reached out to pet Max and whispered, "I had a dog like him once." Eli never promised happy endings. His story wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, about the moment when two souls find each other in a storm and choose to stay. One afternoon, after a reading at a children's library, a little boy approached Eli and asked, "How did you know you could trust Max?" Eli smiled, kneeling beside him. "I didn't," he said softly. But he didn't walk away. And sometimes that's all it takes. The boy nodded, then hugged Max before skipping off to find another book. Eli watched him go, eyes shining. In his travels, he met people who had been homeless, abandoned, misunderstood. He met teachers, caregivers, foster parents, and kids who carried bruises on the inside. And no matter where he went, the story of Beneath the Raincoat reminded them that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of sitting beside someone in the rain and staying. The book became more than a personal story. It became a symbol. Libraries kept extra copies. Counselors used it in therapy rooms. Animal shelters printed a page from the book and framed it near their adoption desks. One page in particular stood out to many, a simple image. The boy asleep with the dog nestled beside him, their shared coat draped over both of them. Beneath it, just 6 words. You stayed. So I stayed too. Years later, as Max slowed with age, Eli knew their time together was drawing near its close, but he wasn't afraid. He knew Max had given him something unshakable, not just love, but a foundation, a beginning. And when the time came, when Max laid his head down one last time beneath that same raincoat they had shared all those years ago, Eli whispered through tears, "You were my first home." Max didn't need to answer, because love, the kind that lives beneath the raincoat, doesn't always speak. It just stays. Sometimes the smallest gestures, like shielding another from the rain, carry the greatest weight. In a world that moves fast, where people are often too busy to notice the pain in someone else's eyes, Beneath the Raincoat reminds us of a truth that's easy to forget. We don't need 100 people to save us. Sometimes just one soul who refuses to walk away is enough. As poet Rumi once said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Eli and Max were both wounded, but together they became each other's light. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Vale Marks. Every new subscriber is not just a number, it's a voice telling us, keep going, keep sharing stories that matter. Your support helps us grow this channel to reach 1,000 subscribers and beyond. It's the push we need to continue creating videos filled with meaning, humanity, and hope. Leave a comment if you've ever had a connection like Eli and Max's. Or share your thoughts if you believe, like we do, that love can be found in the most unexpected places. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the rain.